Good morning, grade 7, and welcome in our social science class. Hope you are healthy at home and doing good. So, students, today we will continue block 14, that is more on our constitution, and then in that block we will talk about effectiveness of directive principles of state policy. So, before starting the class, make sure that you have all the resources, your content book, notebook, and stationery. I hope you are ready with all these items. So first, we will quickly recap our previous sections. This block has covered the fundamental rights and duties of Indian citizens. It has also dealt with the directive principles of state policy as guideline for a welfare state. We talked about importance of fundamental duties and the purpose of the directive principles of state policy. So, let's start with few questions related to previous videos. Why do we have fundamental rights? Every democratic country grants some basic rights to its citizens so that they can lead a life with dignity based on equality and justice. And the next question is, why are fundamental duties important? For the same reason, we as citizens of a democratic country are granted some fundamental rights by our constitution. Fundamental duties are needed to fulfill our responsibilities towards the country so that we can live in harmony and ensure the development of our country. So, our aim is to analyze whether the directive principles of state policy are effective or not in spite of constitutional provisions. So, what you have to do? Pause the video and open page 21 of your content book. Then read the section Effectiveness of Directive Principles of State Policy. So, you will be able to understand whether the directive principles of state policy are effective in reality or not. I hope you have read it. So, let's discuss. Now, before discussion, question of the day is to protect the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes who depend on forests for their livelihood, the government passed the then fill in the blanks act in 2006. So what you have to do? You have to choose the correct option to fill this blank. And the question, why did the government pass the act in 2006? Which act government passed in 2006 to protect the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, those who depend on forests for their livelihood? Okay, now let's discuss this. What are fundamental rights and fundamental duties? Fundamental rights are some basic rights or privileges that every citizen of India is entitled to. And what are fundamental duties? Fundamental duties are a set of duties that a citizen is expected to perform for the country. The Indian Constitution provides the citizens with a set of fundamental rights and duties. What are the directive principles of state policy? The directive principles of state policy are some guidelines which our governments, both at the center and the state levels, are supposed to follow for the social and economic development of our country. Understood? Now, my next question is, what are the directive principles of state policy aimed at? The directive principles of state policy are aimed at promoting socio-economic equality in society and establishing a welfare state. The directive principles of state policy are guidelines for the governments to keep in mind while framing laws and policies. Then, what efforts have the government taken to implement the directive principles of state policy? The government has made primary education compulsory for children up to 14 years of age through the right to education. The government passed the Forest Rights Act in 2006 to protect the rights of tribals, many of whom mostly depend on forests for their livelihood. It also passed the Prevention of Atrocities Act in 1989 to punish anyone who ill-treats a tribal or a Dalit. Then, the Ministry of Women and Child Development, which was set up in 1985, has taken some steps for the welfare of children. The Support to Training and Employment Program seeks to provide employment opportunities to women in foreign affairs. India has supported the United Nations peacekeeping efforts. Now, is it mandatory for the government to implement the directive principles of state policy, and why is it mandatory? The government cannot be forced by the court to implement the directive principles of state policy because these principles are not enforceable, unlike the fundamental rights. However, the directive principles of state policy are very important for good governance, and so it is the duty of every government to apply these guidelines while making laws. Do you think the directive principles of state policy are effective, and why do you think so? Since directive principles of state policy are not enforced by law, they may not be as effective as they should be. However, one can also argue that just having laws or enforceable rights does not necessarily mean that nobody violates them in reality. And the next question is differentiate between the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. We understood the meaning of directive principles of state policy and fundamental rights and why are they important. So now the differences between fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. I have written in short form DPSP. It means directive principles of state policy. Fundamental rights are justiciable. For example, the Supreme Court and the High Courts have power to issue orders or writs for the enforcement of the fundamental rights, whereas DPSP are not enforceable or justiciable. No child can get free and compulsory education through court if the state is not providing it. The fundamental rights are in the form of limitations upon state action. For example, a person who is arrested shall not be denied the right to consult a lawyer of his choice. Whereas directive principles of state policy are the instructions to the government to do certain things and to achieve certain goals. For example, the state is directed to secure to the citizens economic assistance in case of unemployment and old age, etc. The chief aim of the fundamental rights is to establish a political democracy, while the chief aim of the directive principle of state policy is to establish a social and economic democracy. The fundamental rights can be suspended in case of national emergency, while the directive principles cannot be suspended. I hope you understood the differences between the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy. Now, the question is for the comment section. Why did the government pass the Prevention of Atrocities Act in 1989? I hope you know the answer if you have read the section or if you have listened the video sincerely. Okay, children, and also I hope you understood the lesson. Now read the section. Read the whole block 13, India's Constitution for block assessment. And timing is 5 to 8 p.m. and day is Saturday, means tomorrow, and date is 31st of July. By mistake, I had posted block 14 assessment. So, block 14 assessment will be on coming Wednesday. Okay, children, and you will get new questions on Wednesday of block 14 assessment. Okay, so prepare now block 13 again and be ready to choose correct answers in assessment. Okay, in the morning your discussion video will come, and in the evening from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. you will get the block assessment of block 13. In the notebook, write answer of practice question 10 and additional questions 1 to 6. So complete your work today itself, because tomorrow is discussion day. So we will discuss question and answers of content book and worksheets. So before that, complete your work to edit or check your answers there. Okay. And in the content book, fill out my learning chart in the Exceed content book. Have a nice day. Bye bye. Thank you, children.